Hello? Hello? Hi, chat. How are we all doing today? I told you that I was going to stream today, or try my hardest to, and I definitely tried my hardest to the point where I actually am. Sorry, I got a bit distracted for 1 second. So, we didn't get the chance to finish Chapter 2 of Through a Glass Divine last night, so that's what we're going to do today. This is gonna be so good. I can't wait for them to all meet. I love SBI fanfic. Not really the biggest fan of Tommy anymore, but I love SBI stories. So yeah, I had a pretty good day today. I did nothing until 2, and then I went to, it wasn't even a proper voice lesson because it had to get canceled and moved to another day, so I rehearsed with my pianist instead. Then I went to a sober bar, had a lovely tea made of I don't know what it's called, like I can't remember what he called it, but it made me all nice and relaxed. It was amazing. And then I came back, then I came home, had dinner, and now I'm here. Here to read the second half of Chapter 2 of Through a Glass Divine. And as always, if you're new to my streams, if you're new to my content and you enjoy what you are hearing or what you're seeing, be sure to drop a follow. I do things like read fanfiction, play Minecraft. I play Minecraft. I'm a gamer. I just did the weirdest hand motion that I could have done. And I need a webcam. I want to get a webcam someday, but I don't know which ones are good. Alright, enough with the chit chat. Let's do what we came here for. After I fucking pull it up, 1 second. There we go. There we go. Boom. Okay, real quick, let me drink some water. Oh, I'm gonna have to, like, leave stream for a couple minutes in about 15 minutes. That's when my laundry's gonna be done. Well, roughly around that time. Or my laundry's gonna be done from the wash. Oh, right. We did not start from the beginning. Wait, what was this chapter called again? Because I never... Oh, wait, no, I definitely did say Chapter 2 as above, so below. I just need to remember where exactly we were. Alright. Here's where we left off. Through a Glass Divine is written by Bones and the Bees. I highly recommend her work because it is so good. I'll read again the last chapter that we left off on, or paragraph. Although he could feel Tommy's frown, he kept his eyes on his shoes, and was relieved when they started walking across the chamber again. They passed by the statue and the supply crates and through the archway on the other side of the room. Immediately, they found themselves in a narrow hallway that would have been as dark as the stairwell if it weren't for more of those flying lights floating around. There were dozens of them in the hall, the smaller kind like Tommy had, quietly buzzing around their heads that only solidified his initial comparison of the devices to bugs. The lights flew out of the way as they passed through, their soft purple light casting strange shadows along the walls. Again, the Pythia tried to keep his eyes on his shoes, but jolted when they came to a plain black door. Using his free hand, Tommy knocked 4 times on the door. Then, they waited, and waited, and waited, until, after only a few seconds, the door swung open, and the Pythia's heart leapt into his throat. Even without the boar mask, the bright pink hair and intimidating build was easy enough to recognize. Only earlier that night, the Pythia had seen this man holding a gun to Schlatt's head. Now, he was standing a few feet away from him. His face was exposed, revealing cybernetic eyes the color of blood that chilled the Pythia to his core. "Took you long enough," the boar man said. He folded his arms over his chest as he leaned against the door frame, and the Pythia noticed that 3 of the fingers on his left hand were also cybernetic, with the same intricate designs that told him he and Tommy had the same engineer. But more distracting, however, was the fact that the boar man was wearing a short-sleeved shirt revealing several dark tattoos he had, including dozens and dozens of eyes covering the entire upper half of his right arm. It was unsettling, to say the least. "It would have been faster if I hadn't had to practically carry this guy the whole damn way," Tommy huffed, gesturing to the Pythia. One second. That was my student email. Where is my cursor? There it is. Okay, I don't care about that. Yeah. Alright. Sorry about that. I thought it was going to be an important email. It wasn't. The boar man raised an eyebrow. "So you had to use the sedative?" "Yeah, and it was way too fucking much," Tommy said, frowning now. He nearly passed out on the steps down here, so can we come inside so he can sit? Holding his hands up in mock surrender, the boar man stepped back from the doorway, and Tommy guided the Pythia inside. To the Pythia's surprise, this Adaton, as Jack had called it, mostly just looked like an office. It was made of the same stone as the main chamber, with a large slab of black stone acting as a desk, and a hollow map hovering on the far left side of the room. Instead of the flying lights, electric candles were scattered around the office, flickering between shades of purple and white as if they were trying to mimic a real flame. On the right side of the room, a small shrine had been set up. A miniature version of Kristen's statue was placed in the center of a shelf carved into the stone wall, pieces of jewelry and dried flowers littering the base of it. There were also dark stains at the base of the shrine that the Pythia was both tempted to take a closer look at and wanted to avoid seeing at all costs for fear of what they could be. Then, of course, there was the man sitting behind the desk. Unlike the boar man, it wasn't as easy to recognize the crow from the ball. However, the metal wings he wore were no longer on his back, and instead were stretched across the desk in front of him. The man himself was far less intimidating than the boar was, at least in appearance. He was the shortest man in the room, with a slight frame and narrow shoulders. Blonde hair fell a bit past his chin, and pale stubble lined his jaw and cheeks. From what the Pythia could see, the crow didn't have any cybernetics himself. When he and Tommy walked in, the crow glanced up, revealing a pair of completely natural pale blue eyes. And his arms, well, they certainly weren't made of metal. Like the boar, the crow was also wearing a short-sleeved shirt, but where the boar only had a few tattoos on display, both of the crow's arms were completely covered with different designs. Birds, skulls, flowers, stars. It was overwhelming to try and make out each individual piece. Even still, the Pythia noticed one tattoo on his left arm of what seemed like a moth pinned in place by its wings, and for some reason, it made a shudder run down his spine. Fucking death below, the crow murmured, straightening up as the door shut behind them. You actually did it. Sure did, Tommy quipped, gesturing for the Pythia to sit down in a black stone chair that had a single pillow resting on top of it as a cushion. Just like I said I could. The Pythia was a bit more graceful sitting down this time than he had on the stairs, but his legs still screamed in protest at the movement. Once he was settled, Tommy sat down in the chair beside him, while the boar moved to stand behind the desk beside the crow. I didn't doubt you, I'm just... The crow cut himself off, gaze flickering back to the Pythia. It's really you. Forcing himself to look up, the Pythia tried to shove down the anxiety still buzzing in every cell of his body to give the crow the deepest scowl he could muster. Clara will forsake you for this, he spat out, hoping anger would hide the way his voice was shaking. A beat passed. The crow blinked, as if he didn't understand what the Pythia said. Then, he burst into laughter. Holy shit, mate. His face split into a wide grin, arms wrapping around himself as he hunched over with the force of his laughter. I appreciate your concern, but I really don't worry too much about what Clara thinks of me. Shit. Of course. They're deathlings. Why would they care? Fine. Then how does a life sentence in prison sound? Because that's what all of you are gonna get when Schlatt finds me. Oh, come now, the crow said, the corner of his eyes crinkling up as he smiled at the Pythia. You and I both know Schlatt couldn't find his dick in the dark, let alone find us here. The Pythia grit his teeth, heart thudding against his ribs as he struggled to keep the frustration off his face. Because the crow was right. Schlatt was useless. Maybe the police would have a decent chance at finding him, but Schlatt? No. He was going to be no help at all. Instead of responding, though, he changed the subject. Did you kill him? Pythia asked. No, of course not, the crow scoffed. Do you know the bounty I'd get on my head for that? I'd never be able to go outside again. Then what happened at the ball after your kid here kidnapped me? He asked, gesturing to Tommy. Immediately, Tommy let out a, "Hey!" The crow ignored his protest. It just made some threats and said that the city still has time to turn around its sins, blah blah blah. Just shit like that, he explained, placing his hands on the desk. I'm sure you've figured this out by now, but the whole show we gave up there was a distraction so Tommy could get you. And it worked like a charm. The boar chimed in, smirking now. So I was your only target then? The Pythia said, leaning back in his seat. Fine. Then let's quit the bullshit and cut to the chase. Are you gonna kill me? Is that it? Are you guys trying to make a point that you don't give a shit about Clara? this, the crow's sharp smile disappeared. He considered this for a moment, brows furrowing as he looked the Pythia up and down. First off, I just realized we never introduced ourselves. I'm Phil. This is Techno. And I'm sure Tommy already told you his name, he said, gesturing to himself and then to the boar. Second off, no, we're not gonna kill you. And contrary to what you believe, we actually do give a shit about Clara. We just have our priorities. If you cared about Clara in any capacity at all, you wouldn't dare lay a hand on the Pythia, he snapped, hoping he sounded braver than he felt. Phil hummed, looking him up and down again before folding his arms over his chest. I understand you're upset. And, you know, I'd be pretty pissed too if I got kidnapped. But let me just level with you. He paused, glancing at Tommy before looking back at him. Wait, sorry, what's your name? Beside him, Tommy tensed, while the Pythia ignored the way the question made his heart skip a beat. I don't have a name. This made both Phil and Techno frown. What? According to him, a Pythia's gotta give up their name, Tommy cut in, slumping down in his chair, because they're a vessel or some shit. The Pythia acts as a vessel for Clara, he corrected, shooting Tommy a dirty look from the corner of his eye. Therefore, we don't have a need for names. I'm just the Pythia, and that's all you need to call me. There was a long silence as Phil and Techno shared a look out of the corner of their eyes. The Pythia kept his chin up, despite how badly he wanted to shrink down away from their prying gazes. Okay, we're gonna, ask for some clarification on that later if you can tell us. But right now we have other things to focus on. Oh wait, no, Techno said that. Okay, we're gonna, ask for some clarification on that later if you could tell us. But right now we have other things to focus on, Techno said after a minute. We're not gonna hurt you, and we're also not trying to take you away from Clara. So if there's anything you need for your prayers or materials for a shrine, we can do our best to provide you with those. At this, the Pythia scoffed. What I need is to be let go, he shot back, frowning at them. I perform my duties to Clara by advising the Emperor. If I am unable to do that, I'm unable to serve her. I hate to break it to you, but that's the one thing we can't do for you. Phil jumped in, folding his arms over his chest. We are just trying to make this as easy as possible for all of us. Tell us how to help you, and we'll do what we can. Like I'd ever tell a bunch of heretics about my relationship with Clara, the Pythia snapped, letting his anger wrap around the words. I'm sure my methods of worship would be wholly unfamiliar to you anyway. Pausing, Phil narrowed his eyes. What are you implying with that, mate? And here was the point where the Pythia knew he should stop, where any rational person would recognize that they were being held hostage by a very dangerous and volatile group, and should avoid pissing them off at all costs. But when exhaustion mixed with fear and anger, it created a dangerous cocktail. The sedative still fogging over his thoughts was just the last kick he needed to let the vitriol spill from his lips. Don't play fucking stupid, Phil. There was a reason the worship of death was outlawed, and it was because you people are goddamn monsters. I mean, blood rituals? Glorifying horrible deaths? Human sacrifices? His lips twisted with disgust as he glared at Phil through the blindfold. You people wouldn't understand my methods of worship, because I don't have to kill people for my goddess. Beside him, Tommy made a wounded noise, and the Pythia glanced over to see hurt flashed over his face. Turning back to Phil, the Pythia then saw that he and Techno's expressions had gone cold. We could have been doing human sacrifice this whole time and no one told me? Techno asked after a moment, his voice completely deadpan. Bruh, I've wasted so much time. I gotta make a hit list. Well, if we're looking for candidates, I'm sure Clara's chosen would be a strong starting point. Would be a strong starting point, Phil continued, a dangerous smirk spreading over his face. The Pythia's breathing hitched, and Phil's smile grew. For the record, we don't perform human sacrifice, Phil then said, resting his hands on the table to lean over the desk. Also, I don't know what the fuck you mean by glorifying death. We just view death in a different way than most people do. And as for the blood rituals... He paused, pointing to the shrine sitting against the wall. Sometimes, yeah, I use blood as an offering to my lady. To my lady. My own blood. My own blood, to be specific. But also, and if everyone here has their own unique ways of showing their devotion to Lady Death. Blood is just my offer of choice, but it's not a requirement. Huh? That wasn't right. Since the Deathlings had made their resurgence, word had been passed around that about the terrifying ways they worshipped Kristen. Human sacrifice was the most obvious of them all. If a group worshipped Death herself, why wouldn't they kill for her? It only made sense. Maybe they were lying. But then, why did Tommy seem so horrified by the accusation? Was he just a really good actor? The Pythia didn't know. He didn't know, and that was the most terrifying part of being here. Because he didn't understand what they wanted with him. If they told him he was going to die, at least he could start saying his prayers now. But they kept saying they weren't going to hurt him, so why was he here? You never answered my question, the Pythia pointed out after a moment, trying to wipe the fear off his face. What are your plans for me if you don't want to kill me? Honestly, it really wasn't about you at all, Techno explained. You report your visions to Schlatt, and Schlatt uses them to guide his decisions for the government. Our goal is to cripple the government, to weaken their control. So without you... He trailed off, making a gesture with his hand that asked, "Do you get it now?" The Pythia had the most horrible urge to laugh, because they actually believed that Schlatt listened to him. He shouldn't be surprised. Who would think that the Emperor himself would be arrogant enough to ignore the advice of someone who could see the future? Schlatt was certainly impressive, but in all the wrong ways. Instead of pointing this out, though, the Pythia had to force himself to keep quiet, because he was once again reminded that the exchanges between the monarch and the Pythia were sacred. Besides, even if he explained that his absence wouldn't cripple the government since Schlatt never listened to him anyway, he wasn't stupid enough to think the Deathlings would just take him back. He'd seen too much. Their hideout, their faces. He almost wished that Tommy had knocked him out now, because at least then he could claim ignorance and beg to go back. But that wasn't possible anymore. The Deathlings would be fools to let him see the light of day ever again. The realization settled into his gut like a block of ice. The last sparks of his anger died out, and he shrunk back in his chair, fear overriding every cell in his body as the truth was shoved in his face. That all hope had been lost the second Tommy showed the Pythia his face. I understand, he said quietly, the nausea twisting his insides once again. Tommy frowned at his sudden weakness, but he purposefully avoided the boy's questioning look and kept his eyes on the desk. Well, if we've answered all your questions for now, and there's nothing we can do to make you more comfortable, Phil began, the barest hint of sarcasm lining his words. I think it's time Tommy escorted you to your room. The Pythia almost huffed at Phil calling it a room instead of a cell, but he shoved the urge down and stayed silent. A moment passed, and then another. They were waiting for his response, but the Pythia didn't have the energy to give them one. Alright then. Techno cut in when it became clear the Pythia wasn't going to say anything else. Tommy, go show him where he's staying. Then come back here after he's secured so we can debrief. Got it? Got it. Tommy nodded, pushing to his feet. Before he could turn to the Pythia, Phil stepped around the desk and towards Tommy. He placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it lightly before leaning in to whisper something in his ear. Although the Pythia couldn't hear what Phil said to him, judging by the blinding smile Tommy had on his face when he pulled away told him enough. With a quick ruffle of Tommy's hair, Phil then moved back behind the desk. Techno flashed Tommy a small smile too, which Tommy returned full force before turning to face the Pythia again. You okay to stand? You okay to stand? Tommy asked, holding a hand out between them. The Pythia ignored the hand as he stumbled to his feet. A few minutes later, the Pythia found himself walking back into the main chamber of the temple with Tommy at his side. Tommy was practically glowing, holding his shoulders far straighter than he'd been before. They passed under the statue of Kristen again, and the hairs on the back of the Pythia's neck rose when he felt her gaze on him. Okay, real quick, I need to go switch over my laundry. I'll only be a couple minutes. I will be right back. Alright, I'm back. Let's see. If I sound a bit out of breath, that's because I had to go upstairs. And stairs are not my friend. The Pythia tried to keep a map of the temple in his head, even though he knew any chance of escape was unlikely. The hallway that led to the Adaton, which just seemed like Phil's office, was directly on the opposite side of the entrance Jack had let them through. Now, Tommy was leading him to one of the archways on the side walls, which opened up into yet another hallway illuminated by those flying lights. Someone had gone through with shimmering neon paint and decorated one of the walls with an endless array of colorful flowers and spirals. The purple glow from the flying lights glinted off the paint, making the spirals almost seem as though they were moving when the lights bobbed up and down. The other wall was much less entrancing. It was plain, save for the rows of wooden doors embedded into the stone in uniform order. There were no numbers on the doors or nameplates, but like the paint on the opposite wall, there were small designs painted over the wood, presumably to differentiate whose room was whose. They passed by a door that had a childish doodle of a cow painted on it. Then, the door right beside it was blank, and that was the one Tommy stopped in front of. Oh, they're even next door neighbors! I'm guessing the room with the cow in it was Tommy's. There was a keypad sitting above the door handle, and Tommy typed in a passcode too fast for the Pythia to see, before there was the electronic whir of the door unlocking. Then, he pushed it open, and gestured for the Pythia to walk inside. The room itself was not as bad as the Pythia expected it to be. Although he'd scoffed at Phil for not calling it a cell, when he actually looked at the space, the word prison cell isn't what came to his mind either, despite the fact that that's exactly what it was. It wasn't large by any means. His bathroom at the palace alone was probably bigger than the entire space, but it wasn't cramped at the very least. In the far left corner, there was a thin mattress on the floor, piled high with brightly colored blankets that looked as though they'd been crocheted by hand instead of machine woven. There were also several multicolored pillows stacked on top of one another, making the thin mattress look far more comfortable than the Pythia would expect it to be. Across from the mattress, there was a small dresser pressed against the wall. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, and looked like it was ready to fall apart at the slightest touch. There were two doors on either wall of the room. One was cracked open, revealing a small bathroom. The other was firmly shut, giving no hints to what lay beyond. "This is it," Tommy said, stepping into the middle of the room and spreading his arms wide. "I'm sure it's a little disappointing since you're coming from the palace and all, but it's the best you're gonna get." "I've slept in worse places," the Pythia muttered, thinking back to a childhood spent sleeping under dumpsters to try and avoid the rain. Tommy frowned, opening his mouth like he was going to ask what he meant by that. But something in the Pythia's face must have made him change his mind, because after a beat, he shut his mouth again. The Pythia walked over to the makeshift bed, bending down to run his hands over the blankets. They were soft, a little misshapen, but soft nonetheless. Then, he glanced over his shoulder at the other door in the room. "Where does that go?" Tommy's eyes widened. "Oh yeah, that door leads to my room," he explained, holding the thumb of his non-prosthetic hand on a scanner next to it. There was another unlocking sound, and Tommy opened the door with a grand flourish. It's so I can get to you quickly if you try to escape or something. A shudder ran down the Pythia's spine, realizing that Tommy could enter his room any time he wanted. It was a reminder of what he'd known walking in here. That no matter how nicely it was dressed up, he was a prisoner here. An awkward silence hung in the air, wrapping around the Pythia's throat and settling heavily on his shoulders. He risked a glance at Tommy, and noticed the boy also seemed at a loss for what to do next. Shifting from foot to foot, Tommy kept looking between the Pythia and the door to his room, like a child waiting to be told they could go back to their room. Well, in a way, that wasn't that far off. Even if being 18 made him an adult in the eyes of the law, he was still very much a child. And something in the Pythia's chest ached as he wondered how someone as young as Tommy could have gotten sucked into the Deathlings. So, do you have any questions, or can I go? Tommy asked, after nearly 2 minutes of dead air between them. You're the one in charge here, not me, the Pythia pointed out, trying to sound harsh, but just coming off as tired instead. Tommy's brows furrowed again as he considered the Pythia's words. Then, he gestured to the bed the Pythia was crouched in front of. There's a pitcher of water and a cup there. But if you need more, just knock on this door and let me know. Looking down, the Pythia blinked when he noticed a dark red pitcher and matching cup settled on the floor next to the mattress. Oh, thanks. Nodding, Tommy stepped into the doorway leading to his own room, but paused again. We're not monsters, you know, he said, looking over his shoulder at the Pythia. The Pythia thought back to the hurt on Tommy's face during his conversation with Phil. And even though he shouldn't have sympathy for the person who kidnapped him, something that could almost be considered guilt panged in his chest. Then, without waiting for a response, Tommy turned and walked into his room, letting the door slam shut behind him. And just like that, the Pythia was alone. And just like that, the nightmare was over. Or maybe it was just beginning. As soon as the door was shut, the Pythia jumped to his feet and began to search around the room for any way to escape. Obviously the doors were locked, and of course there were no windows this far underground. The stone walls and floor made it impossible to try and figure out where the pipes in the bathroom led, and there was no convenient trap door under his bed. Still, he searched every nook and cranny in the room. Although he was afraid to touch the dresser because of how delicate it seemed, he opened it anyway, and was disappointed to find little more than cobwebs inside. There was no point in this. He was well aware of that. Escaping his room was one thing, but escaping the temple was another beast entirely. But now that most of the fog had cleared from his mind, his anxiety had returned full force. It itched under his skin and twisted his stomach, demanding he pay full attention to it despite the fact that there was nothing he could do to assuage his fears. At a certain point, though, he forced himself to stop searching for escape routes. He took off the blindfold, his temples throbbing at having to see through the enchantments for so long. Then, he walked into the bathroom and turned on the sink to splash some water on his face. The water was warm. This made him pause, because he'd clearly turned on the faucet in the direction of C and not H. But even when he turned it fully to the C side, the water was still more than lukewarm as it ran over his hands. Strange. There was no mirror in the bathroom, and that was something he was strangely grateful for. He could only imagine how terrible he looked right now. The water stung the cuts on his face, and he was sure he had dirt smeared across his nose. He could feel bits of gravel stuck in his hair, staying there even when he ran his fingers through the curls to try and get it out. There was probably a bruise on his cheek, too, from all the times Tommy had slammed him into the wall. As he attempted to wash his face as best he could, he found his eyes falling to his hands more than once. His knuckles were bright red, his palms covered in small cuts from his fall against the asphalt. For some reason, the sight of blood on his hands made him pause, and it took him a moment to realize why. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his hands stained with dirt or blood. As a child, his hands were never clean. His fingers had been dotted with calluses, while there was always dirt stuck under his nails. There'd been a large scar across his palm from the time he'd gone dumpster diving and sliced it open on a broken bottle. It was an ugly thing, ropey and white as a result of its struggle to heal. The Pythia's eyes lingered on his smooth, unscarred palms. When he'd first arrived at the palace, the healers had kept him in the infirmary for an entire day, using their disinfectant sprays and smoothing creams to rub away the rough edges of his past. That included his scars. Suddenly, he was yanked out of his thoughts by the distant sound of a door opening. He ran out of the bathroom, figuring out that the noise had come from Tommy's room, and realized he must be back from his meeting with Phil and Techno. Falling to his knees, he pressed his ear against the door connecting their rooms, and tried to see if he could figure out what he was doing. The door was thick, so the noises he heard were faint. He could hear footsteps followed by a loud groan, before there was a faint thud, like Tommy had just collapsed on his bed in a heap. For a moment, there was silence. He was about to move away from the door since it was clear Tommy was alone, but froze when he heard Tommy's muffled voice suddenly ring out. He was speaking. The words themselves were impossible to make out, but he could at least recognize the tones of Tommy's voice. Then, he made out two single words: Kristen and duty. Praying. Tommy had to be praying. The heaviness was back on his shoulders. He moved away from the door, heart pounding in his chest as he crawled towards his own bed. Despite the fact that it wasn't that cold in the temple, a chill had settled deep inside of him, and he buried himself under all the knit blankets as he turned off the electric candles sitting near his bed. The room was plunged into darkness. Before the Pythia could close his eyes, though, his gaze flickered up to the ceiling, and he froze. There'd been one detail about his cell he hadn't noticed till now, and it was that the ceiling was covered in more of those designs that lined the walls outside. Shimmering yellows and pinks streaked across the stone ceiling, swirling into and around each other like two living things. The paint glowed faintly in the dark, emphasizing the small dots scattered around the swirls that were both like stars and not at the same time. Like stars and not at the same time. It was beautiful. It was so completely and horribly unfamiliar. Clara, he whispered into the darkness, eyes transfixed on the paintings above him. I need your guidance, desperately. He paused, as if he was waiting for a response. But he knew better than that. Just send me a vision telling me how to get out of here, or if I need to just wait it out, because I can do that, he continued, his voice cracking. I can wait if that's what you want. I'll push through whatever they do to me, just to give me some idea of what's going to happen. His eyes were burning again. The shimmering swirls started to blur, and he turned to bury his face in a pillow instead. Hear my prayer, wait, no, okay, it's his thoughts, so I'm just gonna... Hear my prayer, Clara, he pleaded in his mind. I know this is Kristen's domain, but just listen for me, please. His ears rang in the resulting silence. Oh man, that was a good chapter. Whew. Woo. And props to Bones and the Bees, man. Always so incredibly talented with their writing. Or with her writing. I don't know. Did she change? I don't know. Alright. I think that is going to be my stream. Next stream is probably going to be either the next chapter of this or Minecraft or something different. I have a oh, I almost completely forgot about this. I have a suggestions channel in my Discord. Oh shoot, I don't know if... Hold on. Let me see if the... Oh shit, wait, let me move this to... this. There we go. Okay. I think the link still works. So, I have a suggestions channel in my Discord. If you want to join the server, if you haven't already, and give me some suggestions of things that you want to see me play or to do. I'm all ears. But maybe not all money. So if it's really expensive, I don't know if I'll be able to play it. Alright. Let's see who we can raid. Oh! I know just who we can raid. We're gonna raid Mel! Mel is playing Inscription. Oh shit, I thought that my headphones were connected. I am so sorry. Okay. I don't really remember what Inscription is about, even though I literally watched Rambu play it. I know it's like some kind of card game, I think. So, yeah. I am going to do a test. Because I have to do a test before Sunday, because that is when it is due. Alright. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night, and I will see you in the next stream, whenever that may be. Alright,